My name is Kate Brodock, and I'm the Executive Director of Digital and Social Media at Syracuse University. Basically what that means is I run their digital and social media programs. It is a lot of fun here. I've been here for about a year. And before that, I was running a small social media marketing firm for several years, which started in Boston, which is actually how I met our guest today. I think actually that I was on one of the first community roundtables in John Harvard's. Literally, it was a big round table in the corner of the bar, which was fantastic. So it's been really awesome to watch Rachel and her co-founder, Jim Storer, get this up and running, and it's been really successful. So just a couple of logistics. You're welcome to actually join the Hangout. What we'll do is we'll just probably mute you. We're working out a couple of glitches. I had meant for just Rachel and I to be on here, but you're more than welcome to come and join there. We're streaming on YouTube. The URLs are in the hashtag SUDigital, and we also are on an embed on a website on the Syracuse University site. URL is also available. Please join in the Twitter conversation. We'll be using both the community manager hashtag, which is CMGR, and the SU Digital hashtag. I would invite everybody to ask questions as we go along, and we'll be culling those. Any that are kind of pertinent to the discussion that's going on, I'll bring them up to Rachel, and if not, we'll have about 20 minutes at the end to ask some broader questions that can be answered, and we'll be culling those, and I'll ask them of Rachel at the end. So without further ado, we're going to discuss community management with Rachel Happe of Community Roundtable. Off to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Kate, and thanks for having me. It's my first G+ on air, or Hangout on air, or whatever we're calling this broadcast thingamadoo. I am going to share some slides that I use to present kind of the overview of community management, and I'm very pleased to be speaking to an education audience today. I know this issue probably comes up in a lot of different areas in the education space. Certainly, we have a couple of customers that are approaching it from the outbound marketing and communications end of things, but we also have some customers that are looking at this from an internal communications perspective, which is also interesting. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see this, and it's an image of a barn raising, because I really like this idea that we're building something or collaborating together to be more, to do more together than we can by ourselves. The Community Roundtable, as Kate mentioned, I don't want to say we started in a bar, but we certainly had a lot of conversations with local people here in bars, and we still do, because we like getting together in real life as much as we like the online piece. One thing that's true for most people who live in this world is that the online drives offline and vice versa. But we created the Community Roundtable because we saw the adoption of these social technologies really taking off. And we were early in the management and use of a lot of these social technologies, and knew from both of our backgrounds that there was going to be increasingly a crisis of understanding how to manage these environments once they existed. And there were professionals out in the world at the time we started this who had a great deal of experience in community management, but in large part they were isolated from each other, and they weren't sharing experiences on a regular basis. and those experiences weren't being documented for the education of the wider community. So our mission at the Community Roundtable is really to champion the needs of community business owners. And our tagline is advancing the business of community, because it's about why we build communities and how we think about value creation and exchange between the constituent base and the sponsoring organization. For those of you in the academic world, that might mean that you are the head of communications, or the head of admissions, or the head of student life, or the head of alumni relations. All of you have different constituent bases and different communities you need to reach out to. You may have a community manager on your team. Both of those roles are people that are participating in the Community Roundtable, our core service, the CR Network, which is really a little bit like an association model in that it's gathering people together to discuss critical issues around running communities. Our second mission is really to educate new community managers and new community owners who are coming up to better understand where communities are appropriate and where they're going to be harder to gain value from. We're here to curate a lot of information. As I mentioned before, we're not the first ones to know anything about community management. There's a long and storied history that I'll get to. We learn a ton from the member organizations at the Community Roundtable, and there's really a gamut there. Most of our members are commercial, but they span from technology to traditional insurance and financial services companies, to consumer brands, startups, and Fortune 500s. We've got some service organizations in there, and we also have some academic organizations in there. The University of Connecticut system and Babson are the two that I know of offhand. So we've learned a great deal from listening and working with those members. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And I want to get to this point that communities are not new. Online communities are not new. The bulletin board system started in the 70s. The Well, which is one of the most renowned communities online, started in 1985 and has gone through several iterations. IRC chat was very popular in the 80s and 90s. AOL came along. So the technology has changed. And as the technology has changed, and as more and more social networks and social media technologies have come to the fore, online communities have changed. And in some instances, they've really gotten confused in that it's very easy to say, oh, I have an online community. But my perspective is, Facebook has I think 800 million members at last count. To me, 800 million people is not a community. So Facebook, you can't say the Facebook community. It's this huge network, and there may be lots of communities on the Facebook platform, but Facebook as a whole, to me, is not a community. So that's just a level set in that people were doing online community management before some of us even started our careers. So also to level set, I want to talk about what I think community is. And community to me, like I said, is not the tools. The tools change. There are community meeting places, if you will, different outposts and different locations for us to interact. What community is really at the core relationships. Usually we come together for a purpose or a goal. Discussions are what lead us to collaboration and education. Passion fuels really good relationships and really good communities. And it's really these connections, and it's more of this organic thing. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Interestingly enough, running the Community Roundtable, it took me a couple of years to come up with a really good description of community now that online had entered the picture, because in the traditional definition of community, it was very geography focused. But now that community is everywhere, what is the salient things that hold us together? And to me, it's a group of people with unique and unique is important, and shared is important. Values, which means what do we want to do and how do we want to do it. Behaviors, which is how do we communicate and interact with each other. Humor is a good example of this. Some communities are very sarcastic, if you will. That's one example of humor. Some are not at all. Some are very serious. So that's one way to identify what's in the community and what's out of the community. And then artifacts. Artifacts can be anything like we, in church programming calendars, we all come together on Sunday morning at this time. Online, it may be we all come together for a Twitter chat at a certain time. We may all come together for a discussion at a certain time. We may never come together for discussions. It's always asynchronous. They may be language that comes out through there and specific content or materials that are generated from the community. One thing that comes up quite a lot is the difference between social media and community management. And to me, they're different things, and different to me does not imply better, worse in one direction or the other. It means we're trying to do two different things with social media management than we are kind of with community management, and I'll explain. To me, social media management or social media is any media that is socially or conversationally enabled. So that can be a image on Flickr that has a comment stream. It can be Twitter. It can be Facebook. Typically, social media management is a loose network with the predominant structure being a hub and spoke type model. There is a common interest when you manage social media in that people are paying attention to that hub for a specific reason. And there is comment and response transactions to the content that's being posted. So it is interactive and conversational. Looking at community management, the primary difference to me is it's about building relationships between the members of the community versus this hub and spoke relationship. And to me, that's the primary difference. It's not where the community interacts, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's on a forum or whether it's on a blog or whether it's on a website. It's whether the sponsor of that network is trying to weave relationships between the people in that network or not. Typically, there's this shared fate or purpose. We're all trying to do something together. We're trying to learn together. We're trying to collaborate together. There's potentially a really wide range of topics and conversations happening within that shared fate or purpose. So it's not, it's kind of emergent and organic in terms of where that conversation is going to take that community. And typically there's a distributed leadership network, meaning it's not all about the community owner, builder, manager, whatever you call that person. And typically there's emergent leaders. So members of the community, through participation and through influence and respect, gain leadership positions. And the core membership is relatively stable and active over time. From a graphics perspective, I use these two graphics to demonstrate the difference. Now, in neither case is it that pure. You have some relationships in the social media management perspective, but it's more of a micro broadcast channel. And there's some advantages to using social media in that way. It's cheaper, it's more conversational, you are getting feedback for the content so you can judge the effectiveness of it. So it's a great way to share content. But if there's not the associated relationship development and emergent leadership aspect of it, it's something different. And Kate, I know you might have some questions around this from the academic area. I can't hear you.
Oh, thanks. I had it on mute. Which portion specifically around?
Well, I know a lot of people have
Yep.
questions around that difference between social media and community management. Is there something you
Yep.
see that comes up in the academic realm?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of things that kind of go into this thought process. You know, first and foremost, a lot in higher ed, a lot of social media activities in general have come from various different places. A lot of it has frankly come from the ground up, and
mhm.
that includes also who ends up being the de facto, quote, social media manager, or in some cases community manager.
Yep.
Sometimes it's a web developer, sometimes it's somebody in marketing, sometimes it's the person who's been doing the PR for years.
Hmm.
That's partially a resource thing, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. And so, what does tend to happen is that it is coming very much from that traditional mindset, which
Hmm.
is a little bit more, which does lead people uh, to behave on more of a hub and spoke model.
Hmm.
And when considering some of those relationships, it's much more bi-directional as opposed to multi-directional.
Hmm.
Um, and it takes a while for people to maybe understand some of those horizontal actions that are happening, which I see as being some of the bread and butter of community management, or
Yep.
of a community, excuse me. So, and this isn't necessarily a quote higher ed thing, but
Yep. No.
getting yourself into that mindset of how to interact on that horizontal level, and then furthermore how to benefit from it is can sometimes be difficult.
Yeah,
Um,
so my next slide is all about that. So why don't I kind of
yep,
talk about some of the benefits I see of community management? And really, to me, it's a perspective change. It's not a tool change
yep,
necessarily, meaning community is easier to build on certain tools than others, but fundamentally, it's this perspective change. Um, so to me, the reason you use a community structure is because it connects disparate people, and allows you to build and maintain and strengthen relationships that you may already have, but also develop. There's something really powerful in theory, like the friend of a friend theory. Um, the opportunity for connecting with friends of friends, your influence is far greater with that sphere than with the general public. And so community management really helps try and get at that sphere because it draws your relationships into this network, and it draws the friends of the people into the network into that sphere. And that to me is a really fertile area for growth. Two, this networked communications environment, if everyone can speak to everyone in a network, it just supercharges the speed at which information happens, at which decision making can happen. Thirdly, and this is really, really critical, is building shared ownership and commitment. If you build something with a community instead of just sharing it with a network, they feel ownership to take that and go communicate it out themselves. Whereas if you're sharing it with them, them being the end of the line feels natural. If they've participated in the building of it, they are much more likely to take pride of ownership in it and share it themselves. So it really allows you to scale in a way that you can't if you're treating kind of these social channels as more of a bi-directional channel. And really, all of that wraps up into this. It allows you to disintermediate the organization's resources from every conversation while maintaining the context of that relationship. Meaning, you can create the environment the positive, constructive environment around your school, around your brand that you want to have, but not have to have somebody engaged in every single conversation or question or answer that comes up. And that allows an order of magnitude change on the cost structure and the value creation that you can get from social channels. So to me, that's why community structures are so interesting, because it allows you to scale. It allows you to scale as an individual. It allows you to scale as an organization. And
Rachel, let me just, one other sort of interesting thing that is at least a little bit unique to higher ed is, we as universities, we're not selling shoes. We're not asking people to, we're not directly asking people to open their wallets. And a lot of what I see being a benefit of a community is literally those warm and fuzzies. Mm-hmm. And people with a university, with whether it's their current university, whether it's their alma mater, that warm and fuzzy actually can be very easy for us to facilitate. And so those horizontal actions that we're talking about, in my mind, are so beneficial just for creating that, in our case, the Orange Nation, you are interacting with people who love Syracuse University, etc. You can share stories, you can, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and in advertising communication terms, it allows you to earn the right to get in front of people more often, because it's not you, it's somebody else.
Absolutely.
Putting that forward, and that's much more acceptable to people than a school pinging you 20 times a day.
And to your point about kind of the cost-saving aspect, because certainly in higher ed, resources, bodies, literally, for managing some of these things are slim. And if you have your community that's creating those warm fuzzies and earning that for you,
and
fantastic.
Creating that content.
So
it's huge. So one example there, Babson is doing this great job of finding student ambassadors who they train at a minimal level to go out and take pictures and videos and tweet about the school. And the students are all posting that content on their individual Flickr sites or Facebook pages or Twitter streams or whatever. And what the school's communications group is doing is really just aggregating that and streaming that out, so that, they've essentially disintermediated themselves from having to create all that content themselves. And by the way, that content is more authentic because it's catching people in their day-to-day existence. Bringing this back to strategic level, I always ask the question, what kind of relationship do you want? And do you have the type of relationship that you want with as many people as you want? And depending on whether you're in the communications group or the admissions group or the alumni group, the answer is probably going to be different. And obviously in the world before the internet, we had in-person engagement that was pretty expensive, actually. And then in the social media world, it's pretty cheap to post and share content. But I think it's somewhat limited if you're using it as a broadcast channel. Meaning it's very, very good for awareness and resonance building, but it doesn't allow you to get much beyond that. Communities then start to allow you to assess fit and get interest and answer questions and really delve into the relationship and find out whether there is a contextual fit, which I call friendship here. I still don't think a partnership, meaning and this is more in the B2B commercial world, if you're going for a partnership, there's nothing replaces the in-person. If you're going for huge donor dollars, you still need the in-person. What communities allow you to do is maintain and stay in front of those people more often. But it also allows you to take people that you may be building awareness with or resonance with in kind of the social world or the online world, and really bring them into the family, so to speak, and figure out whether there's a good fit. So that's kind of how I see social media and community interacting. And you see a lot of our members with really robust community strategies also have very robust social media strategies, and they have an ecosystem perspective on how all of those work together. I will add to that depending on the goal, it will also determine the size of the network that you need. Again, on the awareness and the question and answer side of things, the bigger the network, the better. Once you start getting into specific expertise or advocacy or collaboration, co-creation, innovation, you really need smaller and smaller groups because the complexity of the desired outcome is higher. The other thing that I talk about a lot is, unlike a lot of other initiatives that we do, communities have a different profile. Most initiatives that we do, especially on the communication side, we invest X, we get Y back. If we invest 2X, we get 2Y. It's a relatively linear progression of things. We know what our open rates on emails are, for example. We know, even you can take this and extend it into social media. We know for every X number of followers on Twitter, we get Y numbers of exposures or shares. You can track that over time to get averages. Communities don't really work that way, and in the best case scenario where you have this geometric growth, I often like to say communities look like failures before they look like successes, because relationships take time to develop. And the goal shouldn't be to go out and get the broadest exposure. The goal should be to get those relationships going and grow and develop a pull mentality to your communications. More often than not, communities kind of look like this because they don't get the funding for long enough to really develop those relationships. Or they look like this, which is people get very excited that they have a community, they share it with their entire constituent base right away, and their constituent base comes in and looks at the community, and it looks like any other content-based website, and there's no relationships there, so they leave. But what you're looking for is people to come for the content, find relationships, and stay for the relationships, and then pull in their friends. So the investment and the return payoff look very different, and that's something to really keep in mind if you want to take a community strategy towards things. The cost returns are huge, but they take time to develop. And then, of course, the next logical question is, what are you looking for? If it looks like a failure before it looks like a success. And what you're really looking for is behavior change. With the smaller set of people you start your community with, are you seeing the behavior change that really builds those relationships and creates the change you want to see? If you can get that behavior change, you're slowly going to get pulled naturally and organically from the community. Once you have a bigger community, then you can do more communications outreach to grow that community. Once you grow the community, one of the things that often happens is you change the entire approach to how you do a certain business case because the cost model changes. And so that's another interesting factor. And not only do communities change, but what communities need in terms of management changes. And one of the things we've done at the Community Roundtable is create this community maturity model and said there's 4 major changes or stages of communities, and there's 8 competencies that you really need to keep an eye on and grow and develop if you want to develop a community or a community strategy. And this is not to suggest that you necessarily need to do anything or have initiatives that address all of these competencies, because you may already have open and collaborative culture. So that may not be something that you need to work on, but maybe your tool and IT department just isn't there. All of this will vary by institution, by organization. So what we really recommend is going in and doing an audit of this and saying, where are we along these competencies, and where do we want to be in terms of relationships? And then what are all the initiatives we need to do to get there? So that's how we use that model. And I want to talk a little bit next about what community management is in this context. I define community management as the discipline of ensuring productive communities. And what productive means will vary by what business case or use case you're using the community for, which is why I didn't define it here. You already have metrics. You already know what success looks like for that function, whether it's more leads, more donor dollars. In terms of alumni activity, it may just be more activity because that spawns more dollars and more good applications to your organization, and the tie is not as direct. But the responsibilities generally of community management are to define what the outcomes are, define what the scope is, define what the boundaries of the community is going to be. What are you not going to entertain in your community, whether for regulatory reasons or because that's just not something you want to address. It gets you into hot water politically or culturally, or it's inappropriate for the culture of your organization. Ensure that participants receive more value than they contribute. The only reason people participate in communities is because they get more out than they put in. That's a basic tenet. It's why you have to invest in communities early to get that return later. It's an opt-in type of thing, and you're just not going to get participation if people don't find value there. A big part of community management is promoting, encouraging, and rewarding productive behaviors and discouraging or limiting destructive behaviors. A lot of people, this next one is interesting. I believe constructive disagreement and conflict are what move communities forward. It's what allows us to progress, but it really has to be respectful and constructive, and that the role of the community manager is to keep it that way. The community manager is also the advocate for the community within the sponsoring organization, and vice versa. They're the advocate for the sponsoring organization within the community. Obviously measuring, monitoring, reporting, marshaling resources, and managing tools, all a big part of this. One of the big pieces of community management that usually come as a surprise to newer community managers is a lot of the work is behind the scenes and hidden. You're really there to create the environment for success, not to be the cheerleader necessarily.